Alright, so let's work on getting to know our cameras. This is a DSLR camera. DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. One of the things that makes a DSLR unique is that it has these large removable lenses. So I have a standard fixed 50mm on here right now, but I have a mid-range telephoto that I could switch to if I want to. And having multiple lenses gives you a lot of flexibility, but we're not too worried about that right now. I have a Canon camera. This is a 60D. You may also have a Canon camera, but a different model, or you may have a Nikon or even a different kind of camera. The trick is that every camera is a little bit different. So things that I show you on my camera might be in different places on your camera. Again, the best way to figure out what's going on is to play around with your camera, to look, to find things, to push buttons, go through menu options, figure out what's going on. And then if you ever get stuck, there is a wealth of information on the internet, so do feel free to Google things. But as you're starting with your camera, just the way to start is to figure out, okay, like what's all going on here? What are all the parts? So one of the key parts is the off and on switch. If you're going to take pictures, you want to make sure your camera's on. Right above my off and on switch, I have the camera mode dial. So we're going to be looking at some of the automatic camera modes today. But this is where you switch up the settings, the mode settings on your camera. Over here is an information screen that tells me what kind of settings I'm currently using and some buttons that affect those settings. I can see my battery level, I can see how many pictures I have left, some other things going on here too. Above that, this button is called the shutter release button. That's the button that actually takes pictures, so I need to push that button in order to take pictures. As we look over here, this is, like I said, the lens before. On the lens, I have this ring. On this lens, this is the focus ring. So if I'm using manual focus, I can adjust this ring. Of course, take the lens cap off if you're taking pictures. But I can adjust the focal ring. If you're starting out with photography, I highly suggest just stay in autofocus for now. We'll talk about ways we can use autofocus and utilize it to get the kind of focus you want. But manual focus takes a bit of adjustment. If you want to try with manual focus, go for it. But again, the more you experiment, the more you notice. You have to pay attention to details with manual focus. Okay, up here is the built-in camera flash. I highly recommend you don't use that. It just has a tendency to flatten things. Behind the flash this is the viewfinder. This is what I look through to see what's going on, see what I'm taking a picture of. Inside the viewfinder, when I look at it, I also get some other interesting information. I can see crosshairs to help me with the rule of thirds. I can see duplicates of some of this information to tell me my aperture and shutter speed and things like that. And also, if I hold the shutter release button down, I can see if things are in focus or not. Under the viewfinder is the LCD screen. So this LCD screen has a couple interesting features. So if I hit menu, there's a lot of things that I can change, and we'll go through some of these. One thing that might be interesting to you is you can erase images on your card this way. But another thing that's a really good thing to always start out by checking is what quality of images you're taking. And you want to take high quality images. So usually this large JPEG with this nice little curve, there's no reason with today's technology that why you should be taking small images, and all they do is just degrade your images. On this, I can also click and look through pictures that I've taken recently. So that's the playback button. Then I have a little dial here that helps me work through those things. And then underneath, I have a place where I can screw a tripod in. And a tripod is a really useful tool. I highly recommend trying it out if you can. And then I have a battery over here. You want to make sure when you're going out on your photo sessions that your battery is charged. I really like having 2 batteries, so I always have a backup that is charged in case this battery dies. But just double checking before you go out. Also, on the side here, I have some plugins, and then on this side is where my digital card is, so you need a card to store your images on a DSLR. So that is the basic introduction of all the bits and bobs of a DSLR. Again, play around. What happens if you play around with the menu items, if you change the modes, if you start pushing these buttons? Experiment and just notice what's happening. Okay, so the question is, how do we get good focus and exposure in our pictures? I'm going to start with the DSLR camera, and I'm going to start with focus. So I am on autofocus, that AF, and one of the things that I can do is, as I aim at my subject, so my lovely little friendly raccoon here, if I hold the shutter release button down halfway, I'm going to see those little dots light up as green. That tells me that area is in focus. So if my raccoon is in focus, I can then take the picture and he will be in focus. Now let's say that I actually want the raccoon to be on the side of the picture, not in the middle of the picture. So what I can do is I can set the focus while aiming at him, holding down halfway, and then I can move my composition, move my frame to aim in a different way and finish taking the picture by pushing the button the rest of the way down. I'm continuing to hold the shutter release button down because that's setting the focus. So now I'm going to finish taking the picture. So even though the raccoon is not in the middle of the picture, the raccoon will be in focus because I set the focus first. It's a really good idea to always set the focus first. It does take a little bit of extra time, so that's harder to do if your subject is moving. But set it first, make sure it's good. And if you're looking through the viewfinder, you'll still see those little things, those little areas of light pop up that tell you that thing is in focus. Now for exposure, depending on the setting you're using, that will adjust the exposure. I'm in just an automatic setting, but when I'm in this programmed auto setting, one of the things that I can adjust is exposure compensation. So I'm going to find that in the menu, and it's over 1 and it looks like Expo Comp. So I'm going to hit OK. And basically it's saying it's setting the exposure how it thinks is the best, but I can say, no, I think it needs to be brighter. So I'm going to push it about a half stop brighter and hit OK. And now I'm going to try taking my picture. Take that picture. And then let's see if I go back there and be like, no, actually that was too bright. I want it to be darker. So I'm going to go about a half stop darker. And now let's set the focus, take the picture. And then if I look at them, one's a little bit darker, one's a little bit, well, they're about the same. So let's try that. Let's try that again and go really extreme. So 2 stops above. So this should be brighter. Yeah, that's super bright, you can see. And then if we go back to exposure compensation, go 2 stops below. And the reality is you don't want to do extremes like this. It's more just if you want it to be a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. So let's see. Oh, we haven't taken that one. Okay, so you can see that one is significantly darker. So that's setting the focus and adjusting the exposure in your DSLR. So a quick reminder, we're going to go into camera modes here. You can't adjust the exposure compensation in those camera modes. You can adjust it in this P setting, which stands for programmed auto. And so there's good things and bad things about each. Okay, so let's take a look at what those automatic camera modes look like and do on your cameras. Now, this is a not ideal situation for testing out some of these modes, but we'll go for it and talk about it. So up here, you start with that green button, which is auto, where basically you're telling the camera to choose everything. So it's going to pop my flash and take a picture. It says it needs flash. Right under it, I have the option to do auto, but I'm saying don't use the flash. So the camera is going to do its best to take the picture without the flash. Under that, I have something called CA, which stands for custom auto. We're going to ignore that. And then under that is the portrait mode. So this is a pretty good scenario for taking a picture of a portrait of the raccoon. So it's going to pop the flash. I can't control that in this mode. So it used the flash, and if I had a bunch of stuff going on in the background, it would start to blur that stuff in the background, which would be nice. Landscape mode, again, like this isn't a great situation because I don't have a lot of stuff going on in the background, but it would keep everything in clear focus. And it's not forcing a flash in landscape mode because it's assuming you have enough light. Macro mode is for getting in close. So I don't know if you can tell, but it focuses on that raccoon's nose, and then it starts to blur all the things in the background. So macro mode's about really getting in close. Having a zoom lens or a macro lens really makes a difference for macro mode on your DSLR. But experiment around, see what happens. Sports mode is for taking a quick picture. So I've got a moving toy here. Let's see if this works. So I don't know if you noticed. Oh, camera's thinking. But it took a bunch of photos, so it went into burst mode. It took a bunch of photos really quickly. So if I go back through, I can see that as I held the shutter release button down, I captured the different parts of the motion. And so, let's go back. There we go. So I could see I have options for the toy being in motion, which is really nice because if something's moving quickly, like taking a lot of photos means that you might get that better motion photo. And then under that, I have night mode or night portrait mode. So I've got pretty good lighting here, but it's gonna pop the flash because it thinks that's gonna help. And it also took a slower exposure so that it can like get more of the details in. So if we look at these, you can see some of the details in that black curtain a little bit nicer than in some of those other photos. So those are the different automatic modes on your DSLR camera.